with a radius of 5 inches. Who remembers the area of a circle formula? Which one is it? Pi r squared, good. So pi times 5 squared will get me 25 pi square inches for area. And then our circumference, there's 2 formulas that we learned, but since they gave us the radius, probably use 2 pi r or pi d. So 2 times 5 will get us 10 pi. Remember, the circumference is the distance around the circle, which is just regular units, inches. You'll still need to know these formulas because they can tell you the circumference of the sphere. They won't tell you the area of the sphere, but they could give you the circumference, which could help you find the radius. All right, so our sphere obviously looks like a ball that you would play lacrosse with, or basketball, or baseball. Again, there's really only one dimension, and that's the radius. You can also think there's the diameter, but that's just twice the radius. And then we have a center. So a sphere is defined to be the set of all points in space, in 3-dimensional space, that are the same distance away from the center. That word is called equidistant, which means equal distance from the center. So again, to create a sphere in 3 dimensions, you would just take a radius, and you would like swing it around in all directions so that it would make circles, and then circles this way, and circles this way, and circles this way. So you got a 3-dimensional shape. So we have our center, which is the given point from which all points in the sphere are equidistant. We have our radius, which is a segment that has one endpoint at the center and the other endpoint on the sphere. And we have our diameter, which is a segment that has to pass through the center and have endpoints on the sphere. And then they have some arrows pointing to the diagram. So this first one over here is pointing to the center. What would this one be pointing to? The diameter. What do you think this one's pointing to? Marquise? Good, the circumference. Sometimes they will give you the circumference and ask you to find the radius before you find surface area or volume. So you may have to do a little bit of solving to get your dimension. All right, so our 2 formulas for today that you can add to your formula sheet, and then this will complete the entire formula sheet front and back, are the surface area and volume of a sphere. So our surface area is 4 pi r squared. So basically the net of a sphere, if you were to make the 2-dimensional surface, it's 4 circles that are kind of like pieced together. The volume is 4/3 pi r cubed. So we haven't seen any formulas that have a cube in it, because we're multiplying like the base and the height together to get cubed. So while we're here, just really quickly, I want to make sure everyone knows how to do cubes in their calculator. So everyone has a different calculator, but most of you are going to be using the caret button. I know we should know this answer is 8, but I want to make sure everyone knows how to do it in their calculator. So you can either do 2 caret 3 and get 8. Those of you that have a graphing calculator, do you remember where there's a cube feature? Brett?
You have to hit the math button and then go down to number 3.
Good. Press the number you want to take the cube of first, and press the math button, and you go down to option 3, which has the cubic button to get 8. Is anyone not finding their cube button? No, you might not have one. Do you? Okay. Whenever you take your test, you'll probably want to borrow one from me. Anyone else not finding it? All right, while we're here, let's also make sure we know where the cube root button is. Just like you can take a square root, what times what gets you that number. A cube root, so for example, the cube root of 8 should get us 2. So in your calculator, everyone's calculator is going to be a little different. Graphing calculators, you will press second, no. excuse me, you'll press math, and you'll choose option 4, which is your cube root, and you would type in your number. Now for my simple calculators, these ones, you're going to press, I think there's an X root button, right? So the X root button is above the caret. So if you have one of these, which is our second most popular calculator, you'll type a 3, then you'll press the X root button, and then you'll type in your number. Everyone find that button on your calculator and make sure when you take the cube root of 8, you get 2. Because if you can't type it in your calculator, never gonna have questions right on the back. Does anyone need help finding? Got it. Ethan, you good? Anyone? Yes, you are. Everyone go with their calculators? Okay. So on the front we have surface area and volume of a sphere. So for surface area, we'll use our formula, 4 pi r squared. Notice they give us the diameter, so we do have to find the radius just by cutting that in half. And then evaluating. We will leave this in terms of pi. So 4 times pi times 4 squared. So 4 squared is 16. And remember, to leave it in terms of pi, you just multiply the numbers together. So 16 times 4 is 64. And we leave that pi there. This will be meters squared. Be careful because we're mixing surface area and volume formulas on one note sheet. So pay attention to your units. Surface area is squared. Next one asks us to find the volume. So we'll use the volume formula. Oh, while I'm here, another way you could write this formula if you don't like the one fraction in front, you can write 4 pi r cubed all divided by 3. So if you prefer to do it like that, you're welcome to. On the formula sheet, it's going to look like this, but these are the same thing. So if you prefer to have one big fraction bar with a 3 underneath, that's fine. So now we'll have 4 divided by 3 times pi times 6 cubed. So again, the pi is technically over a 1, and the 6 cubed is technically over a 1. So I would evaluate 6 to the third, which is 216. Then I would multiply 4 and 216 together to get 864. And then see if it divides in evenly, which it does, and we will get 288 pi meters cubed per volume. Matt? You can just leave it as an improper fraction, or reduce it, yeah. If it says round, then you could round. But usually if it doesn't go in evenly, I would just leave it like that. 864 thirds pi. All right, now on the back, let's make them a little harder because obviously you know how to plug into a formula at this point. Number 3, the circumference of a lacrosse ball is 13 centimeters. Find the surface area to the nearest whole number. So to find the surface area, you need to know what the radius is. We can find the radius from the circumference. So step 1 is to find the radius using the circumference formula. These will not be on your formula sheet, so you need to know those. You know all your area formulas and your circumference formula. Now notice it's not 13 pi, right? It's just 13. If it were 13 pi, that would be great, because then we could cancel out our pi's, but we don't have that. So, how do I solve for the radius? Marquise? Good. Undo multiplication with division of 2 pi. Now, if you're going to type this in your calculator, you will need to group the 2 and the pi together, because otherwise it's going to divide by 2, and then it's going to multiply by pi. So 13 divided by parenthesis 2 pi. Now, it's best to not round this number, right? Because we're going to use it in another calculation. So I'm going to leave that sit in my calculator for a minute, but I will write it out on my paper. 2.069, etc. All right, now we're going to use that number to find the surface area. Right, that's what they want. And Joey, when you ask about the formula sheet, you will get one. It doesn't have the pictures of the shapes on it, though. So you have to know what the shapes look like, but it'll say like surface area of a pyramid is. And then we just have to plug this in. And they want us to round to the nearest whole number, which means we are typing pi into our calculator. So 4 times pi times our answer, 2.069 yada yada yada, squared. Right.
This is about the formula sheet, so you said that we need to know like the area for all the shapes would there be any, like in trapezoid?
There could be.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't remember if there are or not, but there are in our notes. So the easiest way to do this in your calculator is just to take the answer you have sitting there and square it first. So like do this part, hit enter, and then multiply that times 4 and times pi. You also could store it for x or use the answer feature. So we should get 53.79 rounded to the nearest whole number would be 54 square centimeters. All right, now the next one is going to be the hardest one. When given the volume, find the surface area. So this is going to use both formulas that we just learned on the front, volume and surface area. So if we're given the volume, the first thing we have to do is work backwards to find out what the radius is. And then we'll use the radius to find the surface area. Sometimes they'll give you the surface area and ask you to find the volume. Same thing, you're going to work backwards to find r and then plug r into the other formula. So you'll start with the volume formula because that's what you know. So volume is 4/3 pi r cubed. And we're going to plug in the volume that we're given, which luckily it has a pi on it, so we know those will just cancel out. So the first thing you might want to do is just go ahead and divide by pi. So those go away. All right, now, how do I solve for r? Right.
Multiply by 3/4 on both sides, and then take the cube root of whatever you get.
Yes. So two things you can do. He said multiply by the reciprocal of this, which is 3/4, which is what I usually do. But you could technically multiply by 3 and then divide by 4 if you want to break it up into 2 steps. But we can multiply by the reciprocal to get those to cancel out. And then over here, remember that the 7,776 is really over 1. So whenever you multiply this in your calculator, you can either type in 3/4 or you can do 3 times 7,776 and then divide that by 4. And luckily it gives us a nice neat number, but if it didn't, you might just want to leave it as a fraction. But we'll get 5,832 equals r cubed. Now, when we do Pythagorean theorem and we get r squared, you guys notice square root. For those of you that haven't taken Algebra 2 yet, you probably haven't seen cube roots a lot. But in Algebra 2, we will see those a lot. So the inverse is to cube root both sides. Just like a square root undoes a square, a cube root will undo a cube. So that'll get me what r is. So again, in your calculator, find either your x root and type 3x root, or for me, I'll do my third root of 5,832. And I'll get 18. Not always will it come out to be a nice, neat number. So if it doesn't, then you're going to have to keep that answer and use it for the second part. Now we want to find the surface area, so we'll use our surface area formula for pi r squared. Plugging in 18. And they want this in terms of pi. So just leave pi alone, we'll square 18. Which will get us 324, and then we'll multiply that by 4. So we'll get 1,296 pi feet squared for surface area. right, we have 2 more. Do you want to try these on your own? Just be careful, again, with your rounding for this one. For both of them, excuse me, because neither of them have a pi in there, which means you are going to have to actually divide by pi and then use that, so they're not going to cancel. See if you guys can solve those, and then we'll go. What makes this one just kind of an ugly problem is that it's not 5,000 pi, so we can't just cancel out the pi's. So we have 5,000 equals 4/3 pi r cubed. So we actually need to multiply by 3/4 and then divide by pi. So it's up to you whether you want to make this 4 pi or if you just want to multiply by 3/4 first, so that these will divide out. So we'll take our 5,000 times 3 and we'll divide that by 4. So I'll get 3,750 equals pi times the radius cubed. And then I'll divide by pi. Now I wouldn't type that in my calculator because you're going to get a big long decimal and then have to take the cube root of it. So I'm just going to leave it like that. And then take the cube root of it. And now I'll type it in my calculator. So I'll do the cube root, which for me is a math button. Cube root of 3,750 divided by pi. So we should get the radius is approximately 10.607. But again, don't round it. Now find the surface area using 4 pi r squared. So 4 times pi times this answer squared. So in my calculator, since I have that big long number, I'll just square it first. And then I'll multiply times 4 and times pi. I'll get 1414. And that would be millimeters squared. All right, I know some of you already worked on the closure. If you haven't worked on the closure, I'd like you to do that now. It is an ice cream cone, so it's 3-dimensional, even though it's drawn 2-dimensionally. Now, some students get confused and think that, well, an ice cream scoop is a whole sphere, right? If you get like a perfect ball of ice cream. But if you're finding the volume of the cone, then that means you already found this part, so you would only need to add on a half cylinder at the top, because in theory the other half would fall in the cone. And this is a little bit of a, so we'd only need half of the sphere. So see if you can find those things based on the given information.